evening. I'd like to officially begin and welcome you to the regular meeting of the Brattleboro Select Board. This is September 18th, 2018, and you'll notice a slight change up here, so I'm going to ask Jan if the meeting has been properly warned.
Yes, it has.
Thanks, Jan. And I'll also accept nominations for chair, because you'll see that we have a couple of members missing.
Can I nominate Tim Russell for chair for the evening?
And are there any seconds, I suppose?
Second that.
All those in favor of me chairing this meeting?
Aye.
Would be aye.
Aye.
Okay.
May I just explain for the benefit of the public
Certainly.
that
Thank you, Peter.
the rules of procedure that are adopted annually by the Select Board provide that if neither the chair nor the vice chair is present at a meeting, then the three other members decide as the first order of business for that meeting who will chair for that particular evening. So that's what you just witnessed. It's the first time most of us can ever remember that actually happening. So here we go.
Here we go. Into new territory. But the first order of business is to approve the minutes of September 4th.
Move we approve the minutes of September 4th.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
We don't need
Oh,
seconds.
that's right. I said that before. You know I was an advocate for that. All those in favor of approving the minutes from September 4th, say aye.
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 Aye. Minutes are approved, and next we have chair's remarks.
Have you read?
I do not have chair's remarks because I didn't know I was going to be chair until very recently. So I'm going to pass that along and ask for manager's comments.
Thanks. I do have manager's comments. The important one is to advise the community that early voting for the November election begins this Friday at the town clerk's office. So it'll be ongoing throughout the next 6 weeks or so until the actual election day. But if you want to cast your vote early, you can do that beginning on September 21st at the town clerk's office. And then the other point I wanted to make is just something that Kate usually will point out on an evening when she's here and there are only 3 members, which is that because actions of the select board require 3 affirmative votes, anything that you don't all agree on this evening you wouldn't act on this evening, or you wouldn't affirmatively act on it. So you could decide as you go item by item through if there's anything that you think should wait until there's a full board, to defer for 2 weeks until we have that full board. I think there's a lot of pretty straightforward business on this evening, as well as a couple of more complicated items, and you can decide as you go along whether you're ready to vote among the 3 of you. Okay.
Thank you, Peter. Do we have any other select board member comments or committee reports?
Okay.
Okay. Now comes the time for public participation. This is, as we always say, a time for the public to have comments, come forward, and as long as it's not already appearing later on our agenda tonight. Please. Yes. And if you could, as Kate always says, state your name, where you're from.
Howard Fairman. I'm following up on some conversations we had here back in January and February about keeping shivering seniors warmer in wintertime in the Gibson-Aiken Senior Center. And I understand that Town Manager Elwell has some good news.
I do indeed. Thanks for asking for the update. Through the Recreation Department, Carol Lalott and her team, they made arrangements for an airlock to be installed. We looked at other alternatives, but the main problem there is that when the door opens, it creates a real draft with the cold air rushing into the room. And so the solution was to install what's called a Mars air heat curtain from FW Webb, and J. King Electric did that last Friday. So from now on, during the winter months when that door opens, the air curtain will automatically turn on, and there'll be a curtain of warm air that prevents that blast of cold air from coming into the room. We thank you for calling it out to our attention and are happy to have installed the solution.
Follow-up, Howard?
May I ask a supplementary question then?
Sure.
There was also a proposal that Ms. Lalott mentioned to me, Recreation Director Lalott, about rezoning the heating system because the radiators don't heat in the senior center. And when they set the heat high enough so the senior center is adequately heated, it is way more than adequately heated upstairs.
Right.
Now, supposedly there was talk of having a zone just for the senior center so that they could take care of that. Have you anything to say about that?
I don't have an update on that, except that we believe that this, what's being installed there at the door will be sufficient to prevent that cold air from rushing in, and we think that's going to be a sufficient solution. If we find as we get into winter months that it isn't a sufficient solution, we'll have to take another look.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, my name's Joanne Ehrenhaus, and I work for Senior Solutions. So it looks like we have a theme going here. You don't have to vote on anything, just listen. I'd like to give you some good news. Number one, I have two things. Number one, I don't know if you've seen these, but Hannaford on Putney Road has designated Senior Solutions as the recipient for September. So if you buy a Fight Hunger bag at the Hannaford, Senior Solutions gets $1 for every one of these that's sold. We just got our mid-month report, and as of today, we have accrued $95, and we're only halfway through the month. So we're really happy about that. And this is what they look like. The other thing I'd like to present to you and the public is the fact that you all know that there's a big increase in food insecurity, particularly in the Brattleboro area. And in response to that, Senior Solutions has decided to go active, and we're doing a fundraising dance at the Stone Church on September 29th, which is a Saturday evening, from 7 until 11. Tickets are $25, which sounds maybe high to people, but it's 4 hours of a lot of fun. Free food. We're doing free appetizers and desserts. The Stone Church does have a cash bar. You're going to have early in the evening, a dance instruction, a group dance instruction by Ray and Lucinda of Shall We Dance. And then they'll be playing all kinds of music from the DJ section. About halfway through the evening, we'll have our silent auction results. So people who are winning their bid don't have to wait until 11 to take things home. And then at 9 o'clock, we're switching gears. And a wonderful group of musicians named Sweet Pond. You may have heard them at the Whetstone Brewery and other places. They'll be coming and playing for us between 9 and 11. So if you like to stay out late and jump around and have a good time, go to the Stone Church, and I think you're going to be happy. And in the meantime, all the money is going to Meals on Wheels. So we're going to thank everybody who plans to come and who will come. We'll show you a good time. And most of all, thank you for helping to meet the increasing need that is arising in our community. So hope to see you all there.
Thanks, Joanne. Sounds like a great event. Do we have any other public participation?
Peter Allen from Adventure Limousine and Transportation. Just a question on the kind of protocol. I've never been to a meeting in Vermont before. Mm-hmm. It says under unfinished business, the ordinance amendment, the public hearing, is that the time to talk about our concerns?
Yes.
Great.
Indeed.
I'll zip it and sit down.
Okay. No problem. Any other public participation for a subject that it does not appear on the agenda? Okay. Seeing none, the next item on our agenda is to convene as liquor commissioners. Do I have a motion to convene?
You have a motion for us to convene as liquor commissioners.
Great. All those in favor of? Aye.
Aye.
Great. We are now magically liquor commissioners. And I'm going to hand this over to Peter.
Sure. So what's before you tonight is a request for a first-class liquor license and an outside consumption permit for MKR LLC, doing business as India Masala House. This is an unusual one in that you have previously granted this license for a different location. The business is being relocated, and so the request tonight is just to have the same approval that you've already provided in the past, but attached to the new address, which is 889 Putney Road, the location of the Colonial Inn. Staff has reviewed all of the materials and finds them to be in order, and we recommend your approval. The principals are here this evening if you'd like to hear from them.
Great. Would you like to come up and just tell us briefly, should it be there? Or-
There, usually for official
If you don't mind. Thank you. So you were just down the road a little bit. Tell us why you're moving.
Well, the location seemed like out of the way, and the last meeting I had, and I told like, yes, I'm here to stay in town. So it was kind of a little hard for me, bringing more people there. So I wanted to be a little obvious and see where people can find us, And I had this opportunity, so I'm moving.
Great. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a question. I'm just curious about, are you guys going to be doing more promotion or advertising? Because your food is delicious. And it would be great. We want to see you prosper here. So I'm just curious if you have with your potential move, do you have any other additional plans to get the word out about your cuisine?
Well, that's definitely where it will be, and because this time, and the business we just started, so we were there pretty much like all those social media, especially the Facebook and the website and all, the TripAdvisor, Yelp, the people who were writing about us. So word was out, and we will definitely will seek some help from our patrons too. Like if you guys suggest something to us, what else should we do? I mean, we put our flyers and even the takeout menus pretty much everywhere in the town. So we're doing our best, but suggestion is always a welcome sign, So anything people would suggest us, we would do, to really put out our name.
Do you recall, was the outside consumption permit also in effect at the previous location? Okay.
Yes, it was.
So there's not really any changes
There's
to
no
the size
changes.
of the area too much? Okay. Well, I've also heard good things, so
Thank you.
I wish you luck.
Thank you.
I think we might entertain a motion for you.
I would like to make a motion to approve the first-class liquor license for MKR LLC, doing business as India Masala House at 889 Putney Road.
Great. We have a motion to approve a first-class liquor license for MKR LLC, doing business as India Masala House at 889 Putney Road. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 And none against. So congratulations, and I
Thank
wish you
very
luck.
much. Thank you.
So I will need a motion to, is the word adjourn? Oh, I wanted to say deconvene for some reason. Motion to adjourn as liquor commissioners.
Move we adjourn as liquor commissioners.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. And the next order of business on our agenda is to convene as water and sewer commissioners. Do I hear a motion?
Move we convene as water and sewer commissioners.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And here we go. I see Steve Barrett is queuing himself up here. Steve, would you like to fill us in on tonight's duties?
Sure. Good evening. I come before the board tonight to seek approval for an agreement between the town of Brattleboro and the state of Vermont for relocating utilities, a water main on Vernon Road as part of the Hinsdale Bridge project. The state of Vermont will reimburse the town of Brattleboro for the relocation of the existing water main on Vernon Road, which is estimated to be about $700,000. The town of Brattleboro has requested to upgrade the existing 8-inch main to a 12-inch main on Vernon Road, and that's considered a betterment. Because it's a betterment, the we would be responsible for an additional $50,000 of cost. And we reviewed we're looking at the long-term vision of what may happen on Vernon Road. Water mains traditionally are good for over 100 years. Who knows what's going to be on Vernon Road in 100 years. So while the road's being reconstructed, Route 142, where the new bridge enters it, we're recommending that we increase the size to a 12-inch water main. That way, if even 20 years down the road, we don't have to reconstruct the roadway. So we feel it's a responsible thing to do, and that's why we're recommending accepting the utility agreement along with the additional betterment of $50,000.
Okay. Does any select board member have a question or comment?
No,
Are we responsible for the whole 700,000?
No, the state of Vermont's going to pay for the
I
$700,000.
thought so, yeah.
And so if we had just said replace it as it is, an 8-inch main, they would pay for everything 100%. But we do feel it's justified to increase the size to 12-inch.
It's also a really cost-effective way to get
absolutely.
that new 12-inch pipe in the ground, because we're not paying for all the related
Right.
expenses, just the
Although I'm sure you guys
differential
would
in the
love to
cost.
dig it up and put the new pipe in yourself.
We would.
And I have to say, it's exciting that we're actually talking about something concrete happening with a new Hinsdale bridge. So that's good
Twice
news.
tonight.
Twice tonight, yes. Does anyone in the public have any comments and/or questions about this this item? Great, so I will perhaps look for a motion. Hint, hint.
Your turn.
Okay, I lost track. I move we authorize the town manager to execute a utility relocation agreement with the state of Vermont's Agency of Transportation as presented, and to approve an expenditure of $50,000 from the utility fund to increase the size of the Vernon Road water main from 8 inches to 12 inches.
Great, we have a motion on the floor to authorize town manager to execute a utility relocation agreement. Can't decide if I'm going to read the whole thing or not. With the state of Vermont's Agency of Transportation as presented, and to approve an expenditure of $50,000 from the utility fund to increase the size of the Vernon Road water main from 8 inches to 12 inches. All those in favor?
Aye.
Against? Passes 3-0. All right, and we have a second item under Water and Sewer Commissioners.
So the next item I have is there's equipment that we're looking at replacing in the utilities division. These, there was estimates put into the utility budget, which was passed by the board this year. So we went out and we sought pricing for these vehicles. And what we came up with is the state of Vermont does a bid system. So this is what we call a state bid for vehicles, where they pre-bid the items. And I'll go over the list, and then if anybody has any questions about the vehicles or the costs, I'm here to answer them. So the first vehicle will be a 2019 half-ton extended cab pickup. The state bid price was $29,904. The trade-in for a 2012 vehicle was $10,000. The total bid price is $19,904. The budgeted amount was $32,000. So this particular bid came way under what we expected. So we're pretty happy about that. The second item is a 2019 3/4 ton extended cab pickup with a plow. This vehicle is used up into where the water treatment plant is. That's why it has a plow on it. The state bid price was $31,211. The plow is $5,725. The total bid price was $36,936. There's no trade-in on this particular vehicle. We're recommending that the older truck be kept for the Public Works Maintenance Department at Public Works. Currently, the staff is utilizing multiple vehicles when they need to pick up parts. Many times they're using large dump trucks to just go get small parts, and it really doesn't make any economical sense. So This vehicle, the used vehicle, would be used to make short trips in around town and also to plow the Department of Public Works while our crews are out plowing the roads. So it makes good sense to us. Plus, the maintenance division, if there's a service call, they need a truck to go out to meet the plow trucks out in their various routes when things break down. So the budget for this was $40,000, and again, the total bid price was $36,936. So again, this was under budget by $3,064. The last item, we're pretty excited about it actually. This is our first. It's a 2019 Chevrolet Volt hybrid vehicle. We did some research on different all-electric vehicles and then a combination. This is a combination. It's a hybrid that uses a small gasoline engine, which is almost like a generator. And so I'll go through the numbers and then I'll give a better description of the vehicle. So the state bid price for this was $32,520. The trade-in of their existing, it was a Suzuki car, which was a 2011, was $4,000. The total bid price was $28,453. The budget for this was $25,000. So this one is actually over what our anticipated budget is, which over by $3,453. But on the previous two vehicles, we're recommending to use the balance. One of the balances is $12,096. The other is $3,064. So we feel it's a good decision to utilize the capital funds to make this purchase. Originally, when we looked at this vehicle, we were looking at just a small gasoline replacement. So I'm coming really to the board to switch gears a little bit. It seems like an opportunity, and we've been listening to the board the last couple of years, where if there was an opportunity to go with a electric vehicle or a hybrid, let's take that opportunity, and this is the time that we feel is appropriate. We're proposing, I'll go over what the vehicle does. The Volt operates as a pure battery electrical vehicle until the battery capacity drops to a predetermined threshold to full charge. And what that means is around town it's just going to be an all-electric vehicle. But if it needs additional power, then it will kick into the gas. The all-electric range is 53 miles, which will probably take care of most trips and most days around town. The vehicle is going to be used by our engineering tech to check on various jobs throughout town. After the 53 miles, the gas engine starts up and recharges the battery, and a combustion engine powers an electric generator to extend the vehicle's range as needed. The vehicle can travel 420 miles on a full electric charge and a full tank of gas. On average, short trips with a frequent charging of the Volt will cover over 1,000 miles before need refueling. Vehicle will be assigned to the DPW engineer who consistently travels short distances. So that's my proposal.
Thank you.
Exciting. I have a couple quick questions, but does anyone else first? Charging station, are you going to have one at Public Works, or are you going to use sort of a standard?
We notified,
I think there's two options.
we contacted Green Mountain Power, and they're pretty excited about it. They do offer some rebates. We're looking at putting, if this is approved, to have a connection at Public Works. And then we'll also have a discussion whether at this time, we're looking at having a charger inside the garage, because we do have electric charging stations right off Fairground Road and Canal Street. There's available there. And then down the road, I guess we could look at having an outside charger also. But there are some rebates on the charging system and assistance financially. So we're going to look at the alternatives to see how that's going to work. I think during business hours, if somebody traveled with an electric car, they could charge it at DPW. But after hours, we would rely on the other sources that are available in the area.
That's great. The only other question I had was I was curious how old the old pickup truck is. I know.
2012 is the.
Okay.
The two pickup trucks that had the extended cabs were 2012s, and the vehicle, the car, was a 2011.
I do have a quick question.
Bless you.
What's the lifespan of these vehicles? Like how long would they potentially last the?
We look at 8 to 10.
Okay.
You know, it all depends on the use
Yeah.
and the vehicle and, you know, something that plows. In this case, it worked out, so this is a pickup that's used by a supervisor that puts a lot of miles on. And then the second pickup is one that plows. So they pretty much have the same usage. Where in other cases, you may find like the engineer's vehicle may go longer, and a vehicle that plows, you may get a less of a lifespan. So.
I think it's great that you guys looked at other alternative forms, like by getting a hybrid vehicle, so that's great.
Yeah, we did look at the all-electric, but it just didn't seem practical. And then the engineer will go out of town, so, I mean, it would kind of limit our use. I think we'll actually, the payoff will be greater.
Right.
And then eventually, as Dave and I were discussing before the meeting, I think the technology is going to get better and better, and then it's going to make a difference where it'll probably be all-electric.
With the exception of some heavy-duty vehicles, it might be some years before we can really pull that off.
I think that will be.
Yeah. Do we have, I'm sorry?
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Any comments or questions from the audience on this exciting development? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion.
I'd like to make a motion to authorize the purchase of 3 vehicles from Scherer Chevrolet of Burlington, Vermont, including a half-ton extended cab pickup truck in the amount of $29,904 with a deduction of $10,000 for vehicle trade-in, resulting in a final price of $19,904. A 3/4-ton extended cab with a plow in the amount of $36,936, and a Chevrolet Volt Hybrid in the amount of $32,520 with a deduction of $4,000 for vehicle trade-in, resulting in a final price of $28,453.
Well done. We have a motion to authorize the purchase of 3 vehicles as aforementioned from Scherer Chevrolet. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. And we have passed that 3-0.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the work. We shall now, I'll entertain a motion to unconvene. That was a joke. Adjourn as Water and Sewer Commissioners.
So moved.
All those in favor of adjourning as Water and Sewer Commissioners, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. And our next item on the agenda is unfinished business. We're going to be discussing an ordinance amendment.
We are, and it would be appropriate for you to reopen the public hearing.
Oh,
We
certainly.
Had, at the beginning of the second reading process last time, you had
Okay.
some public hearing testimony, and you'll have more this evening.
Thanks for leading me along there. Sure. Do I have a motion to reopen our public hearing on a second reading for this ordinance amendment?
I'd like to make a motion that we open up the public hearing for looking at this ordinance and making changes. Or public commentary, if I said that right.
Pretty short, so what do I know? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great.
So staff and Town Attorney Bob Fisher are continuing to recommend to you that you do adopt this this evening, and that we put into effect the regulations that have for years existed as a taxi ordinance in town, but with the broader application to other vehicles for hire. I'm not going to go back through the basics of this since we've done that now twice before, but you did ask a couple of specific questions during the public hearing 2 weeks ago. There were concerns both from the public and from the board that we might be requiring things that are duplicative of either the state or other municipalities. Specifically, Vernon was mentioned because there's a company from Vernon that had expressed some concerns about this. And so we did check that and found that the town of Vernon doesn't have any such regulations, not a taxi ordinance or any vehicle for hire ordinance or anything similar, so there wouldn't be any duplication with Vernon. The state requires, just as far as registration goes, there's a basic registration process for any business in the state of Vermont. but nothing that is specific to vehicles for hire. The regulations that the state has put into effect related to Uber and Lyft and those types of services, that was part of what was the driving force for this proposed change in the town code, exist as requirements that the operators need to meet, that they need to be prepared to prove they are meeting if they are audited or checked on by the state, but there's not actually a registration process with the state. So based on the fact that there isn't duplication and that we do believe that the ordinance provides appropriate and necessary protection for the public in Brattleboro, and that it will level the playing field in the ways that we've talked about before by extending these requirements beyond just taxi services to other similar kinds of service providers.
Vehicles for hire.
Vehicles for hire is the definition in the ordinance. We think that it's a good thing, and we urge you to move forward with it. We do know that there are people who would like to address you further on it as part of the public hearing this evening, and the town attorney, Bob Fisher, is here to address any legal questions or concerns that may arise during the public hearing.
Okay. Unless the board objects, since we do have people that want to speak to this, is it all right if I allow them to speak first?
Absolutely.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
If anyone here is here to speak to this, you may choose who would like to come forward first.
Looks like it's me.
Just state your name and where you're from.
Peter Allen from Adventure Limousine. We're
Located
based-
here in Brattleboro, correct?
We have an office here in Brattleboro, that's correct. We're a registered company in Vermont and in New Hampshire. So I'm sorry I wasn't attending the other public hearings, but the difference between taxi and vehicle for hire is what?
What we did is we took the taxi definition and we expanded it based on the same definition that the state of Vermont is using for purposes of its study that the legislature has commissioned for this summer, or summer and fall, to study whether there should be state regulation on vehicles for hire. So knowing that that's being done statewide, we took the same definition, and that definition is a vehicle for hire company is any person or business that owns, operates, controls, dispatches, or otherwise deals with vehicles for hire, including but not limited to taxi cab companies, transportation network companies, shuttle service companies, and limousine companies. So it tries to incorporate all of them, because the old definition of a taxi was essentially a vehicle that you hailed down on a street, and it had a light on top, and you would hail that down and take it. That's simply, in today's world, with the way things go with cell phones and calling in advance, is not the way it's done anymore. So we've tried to make that more all-encompassing.
Okay, so my company has taxi companies, and we have a taxi company registered in Brattleboro, which I think we're the only taxi company registered in Brattleboro. So we also have school transportation, we also have limousines, and all those have their own independent bodies governing them. The limousines are governed by the federal DOT. We have very specific rules, regulations, insurance policies that we have to follow. So because I'm a federally registered company, all my drivers, every single one of them, goes through random drug tests, drug tests, background checks. Every single one of my vehicles, every single one, because I'm a federal DOT company, has 1.5 million liability insurance on them. So every taxi, every black car, every wheelchair van, every school car you see driving around any part of the state of New Hampshire or Vermont has 1.5 million insurance because I'm a DOT registered company. So I understand with taxis it's always been different, but once you start regulating the so-called black cars, because I'll come in and pick up people, we drive for 2 or 3 local businesses in Brattleboro. We pick them up, take them to the airport. When they land back here, we bring them back to their residence or their company. So if you're going to regulate me there, then why is the federal government doing it?
The intent is not to, obviously the federal regulation preempts any local regulation, so we're not trying to duplicate that whatsoever.
Right.
There are, in our proposed ordinance, various exceptions to what would be a vehicle for hire, which include employer transport vehicles, vehicles that are used to transport the elderly, special needs folks. You have handicapped special transportation programs. A lot of those are dealt with either through transportation or bus companies, and those are federally mandated. So
Yeah.
what we've tried to do there is to take some of those exceptions from the federal and make sure those are accepted from the local registration. But the idea that overrides all of this is anybody who's getting into a vehicle for hire. So if anybody needs to hire a vehicle for compensation to go from point A to point B, the regulation seeks to have some basis in sound public policy, and here it's public safety. What we're trying to do is make sure that anybody who's going to be picking somebody up, that the person being picked up is going to be safe. So is that driver a qualified driver? Does that driver has that driver had a background check to make sure that there are certain crimes that we think are that we shouldn't have drivers with those crimes taking people around? Are we making sure that the vehicle is a sound vehicle in good shape for driving going back and forth? Do we know that it has insurance in case there's an accident? All of those sorts of things. Is there overlap between the federal, state, and local regulation? There's probably some overlap in terms of topics, but we've tried to exclude from the local ordinance any of the state or federal matters which are preempted. So for instance, in here with regard to record checks, we have gone away from what we had in our old taxi ordinance to say whatever the crimes that the state has enumerated in the new legislation with transportation network companies, let's have those same crimes be the ones that are looked at in a background check for our ordinance, so that we're not making anything new there.
Who does the background checks for Brattleboro or for this area?
I'm not sure who.
I mean, at the moment, it's done by the local police.
The state has on its website, the state has a criminal background check that you pay $15 or something like that.
Yeah.
And then currently the police department has a separate background check that they check for
Yeah.
motor vehicle violations.
Yeah. So I do that federally. I do it. Now you want me to do it locally as well? I mean, I guess you're duplicating a lot of the work that the federal government does that I have to comply with.
I see your point.
But
What
also,
we have in here,
sorry.
or you may provide the record check performed for certification elsewhere.
Right.
So that
But
is in our
that's
ordinance.
That's not the case at the moment. You understand that, correct? Because I can't provide, if I, so many different pieces of my business. But we have, for example, the student cars. So my drivers, whether they're Vermont or New Hampshire drivers, immaterial, they have to go through a training class in Vermont. And then if they're going to do a pick up kids, students in New Hampshire, they have to go through the training class in New Hampshire. So we're talking about Vermont. So they go through the training class in Vermont. Then they have to go to the DOT up in, where is it?
You mean for the testing?
Yeah.
That's right in the DMV in Springfield.
In Springfield, Vermont, right? Yeah. So then they go and take a test, a written test and a driving test for the school. I also have to provide background checks for them, which they have to, the school department has to do themselves. I can't provide that information. They have to do it. They have to do the fingerprinting and everything. I can't provide that. Then, talking about taxi drivers in Vermont, I think that the local police want to do that. We can't provide our own background checks. Am I correct there? I think they like to do it themselves.
Currently, we have the 2 steps, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So we're doing all this, and I guess you're adding a lot of cost and duplication to my business. Eventually, that has to be passed down. I don't have any money. My wife doesn't let me keep money. So, I mean, and then you come on to limousines. I mean, you mentioned limousines in your thing. Well, there's not very many limousine companies in the area, but we have limousines ranging from 10 passengers to 14 passengers. Each one of those is controlled by the DOT. I have to have DOT numbers on them. My drivers have to have DOT medical cards. I have to have them inspected by the DOT. They can do spot checks on the vehicles at any time. We're just as much regulated as a 12-wheeler truck going down the road. It's the same. We have to stick to the same regulations as they do. So I noticed that you have that in your ordinance. I'm confused on what I would have to do, because I'm doing it for the federal government, and now you're asking me to do it for the Brattleboro government.
So what this asks, if you're going to be a vehicle for hire, we have the certain elements of, you have to have your driver's license, you have to be of age.
What's the age?
You provide, 18 with at least 1 year of driving experience.
So you do know that in my industry, insurance and DOT regulations, I can't hire anyone under 24 years old to drive cabs, to drive limos, to drive anybody. Most insurance companies won't insure you for anybody under 24 years old.
So you would be overqualified for this.
You're opening the door to all kinds of people to come in that is an owner-operator and say, hey, I'm an 18-year-old kid. I'm going to drive cab.
But that, I'm sorry to interject a little bit here. Isn't that door already open with services like Uber?
Yeah, but if you're trying to tighten up, if you're so concerned about safety, I have experienced drivers, and
I think we should keep in mind that this ordinance is, I mean, the intention here is to level a playing field and to make it advantageous for companies who are doing, like yours, who are doing due diligence with all of these regulations.
But you're also giving me more regulations, because I have a fleet of airport cars that go all over Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, picking up people, taking them to the airport, bringing them back. So that's not I don't think that would be covered under your, you said something about company-owned transportation, but I'm the company, not the company that I'm picking up from.
No, the company transportation would be like if you had a shuttle bus from a parking lot into a factory or something like that. That's the example in here.
Okay, so what regulation would my airport cars be? They used to be called the black cars, but now they're any color you like. But, I mean, that black car is kind of covered under my DOT regulations. And it all started, I've been involved in regulating the taxis in Keene, New Hampshire, plus at the state level when Uber and Lyft came in, because they tried to skirt around everything. You know, they weren't forced to take out insurance. I mean, they could just get a regular insurance for a regular car, but then when they get into an accident, oh, you were for hire. That insurance is void now. So I mean, that caused a huge controversy in New Hampshire. I mean, and we brought in the national. We're a member of the National Limousine Transportation Association, and they came in and we testified up in Concord, and then Lyft and Uber got round that by registering as a statewide transportation company. So now they don't have to follow any of the local regulations at all. And it kind of backfired in our face.
Well, in Vermont, there's recent state legislation that created a transportation network state law with regard to that, which provides, it does not require Uber drivers or Lyft drivers to go get a permit from the state.
Right.
But their drivers, these companies must ensure that these are of age drivers, that they have levels of insurance that are far higher than a typical pleasure car, etc.
Right.
The record checks, etc. So that idea was to try to get at these companies that were skirting the regulations. The idea, and then that legislation passed, and then they didn't go all the way to creating a statewide permit system for vehicles for hire. They said, we'll study that.
Yeah.
So the town has had a taxi ordinance for many, many years.
Right, and we've complied with
yet
that.
It was not capturing these other companies that were coming in and picking up people for a fare. So ultimately, the taxi companies that were in compliance were the poster childs of compliance, so to speak, and everyone else wasn't. So the idea of broadening it to vehicles for hire that captures all of these is so that we have that level playing field.
Yeah. So I'm still a little bit confused because you have the traditional taxis, and before us it was Brattleboro Taxi. So it always was the kind of unwritten law that the larger town or city would be the one that regulated the taxi company. Because if you say, okay, I'm going to open up a taxi company in Newfane, well, you're not going to do too much business just shuttling around in Newfane. So therefore, you could live in Newfane, but you would register your company in Brattleboro, the same as Brattleboro Taxi did before us. So then, when the centers of the taxi industry would be Brattleboro and then in New Hampshire, Keene. So if I was a taxi company in Keene and someone called me up from Brattleboro and said, hey, I want to go from the train station or the bus station to a place in Keene, we would come over, pick up that person and take them to Keene. And it was justified. I wouldn't have to register my company in Brattleboro because there was a reciprocal agreement that if I'm registered in Keene, I didn't have to be registered in Brattleboro, because then a Brattleboro company could do the same, driving to Keene and pick up a customer that's going to the Brattleboro train station, from Keene State College or wherever. So they didn't have to be registered in Keene to do that trip because they were a legitimate company in Brattleboro. So that's how the taxi business always used to work. I'm not saying that's how it should be, and that's how it used to be. But now, how do you differentiate between the taxi company and my airport transportation company?
I don't think we're trying to differentiate in terms of where the call is made from or where you have your company set up.
Okay. Well,
the state, if I can finish, the law provides the towns the authority to regulate taxis.
Right.
Okay. So that under Dillon's rule state, the towns only have, towns only have the authority granted by the legislature. So we have that authority.
Yeah. No, I'm not questioning that.
With regard to the town's regulation, and I can't control what other neighboring towns do or don't do with regard to having a regulation, but Brattleboro's and even our existing taxi ordinance, as well as the new one, doesn't talk about only originating a pickup. It's originating or picking up within the town. So theoretically, if somebody comes from Boston to pick somebody up here and drive them back, they should have a vehicle for hire permit, or under our existing ordinance, a taxi cab ordinance, to do that. Are there some that we miss with regard to enforcement? Probably, I'm sure there are ones we miss. But the idea is to try to get most of the companies operating and transporting people for hire under the auspices of a permit.
So are you saying that that if someone from Boston brings a customer here or picks up a customer here and takes them back to Boston, they have to be registered in Brattleboro.
The way it reads, if they pick
How
up a
are you
person
going to
here-
monitor that? Come
Well,
on.
that's going to be very difficult. It's
I mean, you're
be
going to have
more-
the whole police force. What are you going to set up border controls and check people's cars that come in?
And in that case, we're probably unlikely to see a Boston.
But that's
taxi
not
come in.
fair.
But with regard to the folks that are operating on a routine basis in Brattleboro,
Right.
there are ways to enforce that.
Oh, absolutely.
And in fact, we have in the past have police call up companies and run what is essentially a sting operation.
Right, and I'm 100% behind that, because if you're going to operate a taxi company in Brattleboro, you should be registered, whether you live in the town or not. I mean, I go from what the letter was written to you. It doesn't matter where you live. If you're operating a taxi company in Brattleboro, you should be under the guidelines and the regulations of that town. However, what if Vernon, Newfane, and some of the other towns around you all say, okay, you got to be registered with us as well if you want to pick up people?
That's their prerogative.
But
Under the
it's
law,
not.
that's their
Yeah, I
prerogative.
know, but you can't do that. I mean, because well, you can. I'm
Legally,
sorry.
they
Yeah,
can.
you can do whatever you like.
I-
That's I withdraw that statement. But it becomes so expensive and unfair that each little town could regulate the taxi company that you would be charging $50 or $60 a ride just to cover the cost of registration. And you got to think about that.
And that,
No, those are actually very fair points, and this is a part of the reason why we're having public hearings,
Yeah.
so that the one thing, I mean, we talked about this last time at our last select board meeting. The one thing we don't want to do is have duplicate efforts, so that if you are already crossing all the T's and dotting on the I's, we want to avoid making it more difficult for legitimate businesses, and then also making it very difficult for our residents to have other choices for getting around. I think the main piece because this was really focusing or trying to focus on Uber and Lyft, if I'm not mistaken, and talking about this new industry of people who could pull out of their driveway and call themselves an Uber or Lyft driver and pick someone up and go do whatever they're going to do, but not having had a background check. Or it's about public safety. I really don't think it is our intention to make it more difficult for people who are operating businesses and, again, offering more choice. I think the purpose was to really look at some of these newer vehicle for hires, where people are using private vehicles, and now private vehicles are also on the road doing business. And I think that's the main piece of what we're trying to get at. And so that's why we're trying to explore how do we do this in a way that levels the playing field, so that those cars, unregistered, improperly insured, undriver checked, are doing the same business on the road as your cars.
Right.
And so I think that's what we're trying to explore and get at, is just trying to figure out how do we do this in a way that just makes sense and doesn't cause more costs for you if you're already doing that.
Right. Right.
So I have a question along the same lines, because obviously the already licensed taxi companies they're safe. We don't have to worry about the public safety part of them. They're already fine.
Right.
And we're not talking about leveling the playing field for them. We're talking about making the four contract services have to meet similar criteria, similar safety regulations. So my question is, why don't we exclude existing licensed taxi companies from this ordinance? Since they already are meeting all of those requirements, why don't we make it specifically for private contractors such as Uber and Lyft? I mean, do we really have to have
To bite my own foot, I don't think
I want
that's
to
a
hear
good
from the
idea.
attorney.
Oh, I'm
We'll
sorry.
hear from Bob first.
Yeah.
well, then you're number one, you're not having a level playing field, if that's one of your goals with regard to that. But if you're excluding, we already have a taxi ordinance. So if you were excluding it from vehicles for hire, are you talking about then repealing a taxi ordinance?
No, I'm talking about adding an ordinance that includes those specific private contracting
Well, that's a.
for hire cars.
That's the.
Yeah, please.
So that was the intent of just changing the definitions, and then the reference to every place where it said taxi this or taxi that, it now says vehicles for hire this and vehicles for hire that, was exactly to do that, so that it didn't change the requirements of the taxi ordinance. It left them exactly as they have been for taxi companies, but changed the definition of who it applies to so that it would bring in those other types of providers. That was exactly the intent.
So why then do the people that are already meeting the regulations have to do more?
They don't have to do more. They just have to do the same as they've been having to do in the past.
But they have to pay $100 a car.
Well, so the question,
Right, but they already are.
Yeah.
Venture,
You're already paying $100 per vehicle in
they're
Brattleboro?
registered
Yes.
here, they have even their New Hampshire vehicles registered here, they have their license, et cetera. So this gentleman here and his company, to the best of my knowledge, having
Right.
checked with Town Manager, Secretary Jan,
Yep.
is in compliance
Yeah.
That's correct.
with your vehicles.
right,
Yeah.
So okay, because well, again, this is, as you said, Shanta, this is why we have these hearings, because we have the need to protect public safety and make sure that things are equitable, maybe not
Absolutely.
equal, but equitable.
Absolutely.
And so we have these hearings to find out, and what I've heard in the last two meetings is that this is a real hardship on you. And now I'm hearing that, well, actually it's not, because you're already doing it, so
Right.
what's the
I've
problem?
never said it's a hardship. I think a hardship becomes when, I differentiate between the taxi.
I don't want to go with definitions. Tell me
Yeah.
why it's a problem for your, how is this going to hurt your business?
It's not going to hurt my taxi business because I'm all for regulating. If I'm operating in Brattleboro, the same as I operate in Keene, if any other taxi company wants to start up in Keene and drive in Keene, whether they live outside of Keene or not, then I'm all for having regulations so that you can check their insurance, background checks, driver's license, whatever. That's great. We do that through our insurance companies and other companies that we hire for us. I have no problem with that. But now I'm also doing that with my black town cars. And
I understand,
pay,
but how is this
well,
going to
are
make
you now
that
going?
different?
Are you
How's it
now
gonna
going
hurt
to
you?
charge me $100 for each of my black town cars because I've got 30 of them?
Now, is that the intention? Is that what this will do?
Let me speak to that, because you may choose to refine the definition that we brought you. As we looked at preparing this, it did start with Uber and Lyft drivers, but it begged the question of if there's a limousine operating, we don't see very many of those, but operating as a limo for a limo ride. But if there's a limousine operating, how is that different? How is the risk for the public any different than riding in a taxi cab? And especially the one that is much more common from this company and other companies in town is rides to the airport. So if you're going to get into a car and be taken, for money from Brattleboro to an airport, or picked up there to be brought to Brattleboro, although that actually technically wouldn't apply because it's not originating in Brattleboro. But the services that provide rides from Brattleboro to the airport have not been subject to our taxi ordinance, and it begged the question to us of why. So as Bob wrote the definition of vehicles for hire, in our discussions about leveling the playing field, it seemed it's not so much specifically just about Uber and Lyft and those types of services. The conversation started there, but truly leveling the playing field would also take in the rides to the airport.
I guess on that level of level, I think is beyond what I'm willing to support at this point. If there are very few people getting rides to the airport and very few limousines operating in Brattleboro, then this is creating a problem for all, the limos aren't paying the $100, right?
Well, in your ordinance, yes. They will
In the
have.
proposed
So all of your
ordinance.
100 limos are paying $100 each?
No, not at the moment.
Okay.
No.
in this ordinance it would, like, basically he would
Yeah,
have to
and
pay
what I'm saying is
$100 per
that,
car.
what I'm saying is that seems like a problem that doesn't really need to be solved. It isn't a problem. The people that aren't insured, the people that aren't maybe qualified, that haven't passed background checks, and that are operating, as you said, around the edges, are the problem. And if we're going to be creating other problems for existing businesses by trying to solve that problem, either we try to refine it much more, because I don't think we need to assign, to add those two, the airport rides and limos. There may be others that we don't need to ride. There are lots of, but I think we either refine it a lot more, or we wait for the state to do it. And we just follow whatever they say.
So you've identified certainly another option for the board, which would be to just not pass this and wait and find out what the state does and leave our taxi ordinance alone for now, and see what comes. I think, though, from the way the conversation has been evolving and from what you've just said, if there's agreement among the board members that you do want to take taxi regulations and apply them more broadly, because there's people who are driving in town like a taxi and ought to have to comply with the same requirements, but you don't want it to apply to the people who provide a ride to the airport, I think it's a fairly simple matter that we change the definition in such a way that it will exclude those who are providing a ride to the airport.
Actually, I want to go a little bit more broader than that. What I was thinking about since the last meeting is I certainly don't, it's partly what you were saying, David, in terms of I don't want to place undue burden on businesses that are already following these, the laws of the land in terms of federal and state and all that. I don't feel comfortable signing on to that. I would almost want to comb this through a little bit in more detail and continue hearing out how it would harm existing businesses that are already, they're not taking cars out of their private garage. They're registered and they're doing what already they're supposed to do. And I'm also not saying I'm comfortable with, if someone's doing Lyft or Uber, those should be regulated. But I again, don't want to place undue burden on existing people who are following the law.
So the ones that are already registered providing taxi service, this doesn't change anything about how our ordinance would apply to their taxi service.
They don't need to pay, for example, they wouldn't need to pay for whatever the costs would be.
They would, but they already are for their taxi service.
Well, so then, that's the confusing part of it. What would we have on file to illustrate? Like, is it just a matter of if there's already a business that has this, they just provide the paperwork and proof?
There is one right now, and there's an annual process we go through, and
I have no problem.
Adventure is the one right now.
Right.
That has provided all of the necessary paperwork, everything that is spelled out before you in this ordinance. The only thing that's different is we're changing that definition so that it applies to more companies, but and the individuals who do this freelancing. As a taxi operator in Brattleboro, Adventure is already complying with everything. They're paying the fees that are shown in here for their vehicles. They're paying the fees that are shown in here for their drivers. And they're the only company that is currently in compliance with the ordinance for operating here in Brattleboro.
Except now you've added vehicles for hire.
If it gets adopted in this form, that's the discussion the board is having, is to maybe not extend it so broadly.
One thing that, sorry, did you?
I was just going to say one way you could do an exclusion, because if you want to include vehicles for hire, that would include like the Uber and Lyft drivers as well as taxis, but not the shuttle bus or limousine to the airport, would be we could look into the DOT regulations, and if you're DOT regulated, that could be an exception, along with a lot of these Americans with disability, handicapped, those are already exceptions. Right. But what I did is I simply took the definitions and the exclusions based on what the state legislature said to put into its study for the summer. So I figured if they're studying it and they're using these exact terms, I didn't add limousines. That was in there.
That's exactly
but
the right
that's not
template.
to say that the town of Brattleboro, because it's not regulated by the state at this point, could exclude limousines. I think we want to define what a limousine is and how they're regulated otherwise, if you wish to do that. But that is a
But you're saying that we could take something and say if it's already DOT regulated, for example, that would still cover.
I think I'd want to check that might be a little too broad to say DOT regulated, but we can look into, and perhaps with adventure taxis or limousine services, help to look at what those DOT requirements are. It's possible that you carve out the exemptions for limousines or your shuttle. I'm thinking of like Thomas Transportation, probably a competitor of yours, I suppose. But, but I mean, a shuttle van, whether it's a black car or a van going to the airport, we're all talking about that same sort of limousine service too.
Is there consensus among the three of you that you'd like us to narrow the broadening of the definition? So you still want to go from taxis to something more to level the playing field for the folks that are providing the rides around town. But is there, I don't know that I've heard from all three of you that what you want to do is not go as far as regulating the rides to the airport.
Well, I think to be as specific as possible, I don't know if it can be this limited, but I would like to change it to include private contractors not currently regulated, and just have that be what we change the ordinance, if that's legal.
It can't be worded like that, because that's going to pick up, the parts of this service that aren't currently regulated. And I'm hearing, at least for you personally, an intent not to do that.
Personally, I would like to see, with regard to the taxis, that anybody operating a taxi service that is operating in Brattleboro, picking up, dropping off, operating fares for hire, should come under the Brattleboro taxi ordinance. So you can't say, I'm sorry guys, but you can't say, well, I live in Vernon, so I don't have to comply with Brattleboro's regulations. That's not true. I mean, in Keene, New Hampshire, I hate to keep mentioning New Hampshire and Vermont, I'm sorry. But I don't live in Keene. My company and yard is based in Marlborough, which is just outside of Keene. But I operate my taxi service in Keene, so I therefore register my taxis and drivers in Keene. That's fair. That's how it should be for everybody. So we have 3 or 4 taxi companies in Keene, and they're all registered. In Brattleboro, it's a little bit unfair because we have, sorry guys again, we have Vernon Taxi that isn't registered and operates in Brattleboro. And in my opinion, that's not right. One rule for everybody. And then you come on to the other side of things with the black cars transporting down to the airport, stuff like that. We're regulated. Our limousines, anything over 8 passengers is regulated by the DOT. So I have to have them DOT inspected. All the drivers have to go through hoops to get their permits and everything else. They have to have drug tests, background checks, everything.
So just for a clarification for my own self,
yes.
Part of the onerous nature of the new regulations, in theory, is that over and beyond the taxi designation, when we get into limousine or cars that are already regulated by the DOT, vehicles that are already regulated, that's where the very heavy extra costs come in.
Yes,
for you?
because if you're now saying, well, if I have to pick up, like I have one company, well, I have several companies, and we have some schools that we drive for. So if we pick up in Brattleboro, under the ordinance that I understand now, I would have to register each car at $100 to do that. So it becomes a problem because I don't know what car I'm going to send over to Brattleboro. So then I would have to register all my cars, otherwise I could be stopped at the border and arrested. Joking.
So I think I'm going to let you complete your thought. We were talking about trying to move towards a consensus. We have another situation here where we're missing 2
We also should still also allow for anybody else who's going to make any.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for letting me vent.
Of course, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The one thing I would say that I think maybe can provide context for the additional comments that you might hear during the public hearing is just, it seems clear to me that the 3 of you aren't going to be ready to adopt this ordinance this evening.
Okay, with this one.
So, right, so the goal, as we hear the rest of the comments that the public may wish to offer, and then as you tell us where you want to go from here, would be to define what do you need from staff and the town attorney in terms of additional work on this to get it into better shape to get to where you're trying to get to. That's not where it is tonight, but still is something that is above and beyond our existing taxi ordinance.
Well, so something was mentioned about the DOT regs and looking at that and seeing if there could be exemptions carved out, for example, for black cars, shuttles, or whatever they are. So that would be, I'd like to see that as a step.
Sure.
As one
See,
of the
what I
things.
don't know on that are the distinctions between the black car, limousine, those definitions, because we were attempting to be all-inclusive. It didn't really
Sure.
matter to make distinctions. Now I'm perfectly happy to look at that, don't get me wrong. I can't speak because I don't know
No, and
tonight.
that's the point is-
Those particular distinctions between what is a shuttle van versus a limousine versus a black car.
And that's what we can further
Yeah, we can look at
research
that, sure.
and then report back to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So could I just
Go
mention
ahead.
one very quick thing? You mentioned how you could tell the difference between the certain vehicles. So in Keene, we said every taxi had to be clearly marked as a taxi. It had to have the taxi name and phone number on it. So it's very, very obvious that if I drive one of my black cars as a taxi, it's incredibly obvious that I'm using one car for a different purpose. So that was one way that we got round that in Keene, because they wanted to do exactly what you wanted to do, is to say, okay, well, if you're picking up people in Keene, you've got to register that car. But
May I just
Yes,
say
I'm sorry.
that we get that, and that's exactly the distinction that's made today in the town's ordinance. So we a taxi is
Should look
a
like a taxi.
definable thing that,
Yes.
we kind of all can agree on what a taxi is.
Right.
But in an attempt to go beyond just regulating taxis,
Right.
to regulating Uber and Lyft and others that are like that, where we don't feel like there's a fairness in
Right.
the
And that's the-
regulations right now, that's where
That's
what
the
we've got to do
problem.
more work on
Yeah,
is
I
better
agree.
defining how
Yeah.
far out that broader definition goes and where it should stop.
yeah, I agree. And that's nationwide. That's the problem with
That's
Uber and Lyft.
what we're facing. Yeah.
So, yeah,
Right.
if you come up with a great solution, then we'll sell it to every other town.
So vehicles for hire has become a little bit too broad.
That's what I'm hearing, and that's
for
reasonable. So
not
we're
being
going to work on
business.
how to squeeze that back towards just the taxi ordinance, but not all the way back to the taxi ordinance.
That's our
Right.
current mood. We do have some other folks here who
Yes.
wanted to say a few words. So anyone else want to come to the mic?
Yeah, I'm Bill. I just came.
Could you come over?
Somebody behind you, Bill.
It's mainly for our,
Go ahead.
No, you sir.
oh, no, right to the microphone as
Go
well.
to the mic.
My name is Tom Hendricks. I run Vernon Transportation. All right?
Okay, Tom?
I have a problem, or a few problems with what you're actually trying to do. You're saying safety, okay? Or is it really just a money for the town,
It's safety.
okay? Then you're not addressing it in a proper way. You need, if you're gonna do it, federal DOT MC numbers, all right? You have to have a med card. There's nothing here that's saying that the driver is certified to drive by a doctor. Your ordinance is actually in violation. It says you have to have normal hearing. That's against ADA. Okay? Now, if you're talking safety, let's do safety. All right, but you're not. All you're looking for is money for the town. All right, we're already paying registrations to the state. We're paying DOT, for our DOT numbers and everything else. Why is there more regulations? What says that, I'm not picking on you, all right? But what says that, he comes from Keene? How is he going to even know that there's a taxi regulation in Brattleboro? If somebody comes from Montpelier, if somebody comes up from New York City to pick somebody up, they're not gonna know. You want to level the playing field? You can't. If it's on a state level, where it's through statutes and through laws, okay, fine. All right, that's why with DOT, they have IFTA. You're registered in all 50 states if you want to be, all right, by filling out a form. But you don't have to know exactly every law in town, because for hire, how about all these trucks that come into this town to pick up a load? That's a vehicle for hire. The ambulance is a vehicle for hire. And you can't tell me the buses aren't vehicle for hire. You're not addressing the handicapped people that need wheelchair lifts. I'm fired up, I'm sorry. This is my wife.
I was here last week. I kind of started this whole ball rolling, and I'm feeling a real need to speak at the moment.
Could you tell me your name?
My name is Terry Hendricks, and it's spelled Terri.
Thanks.
Thank you. I also had a conversation with the owner of Thomas Transportation, and I have a written letter from him as well. All right? The way that we see this whole thing is, number one, if we only need to run our buses that have the DOT federal regulation things on them, even though all our vehicles do, are insured. My husband maintains vehicles like you wouldn't believe. He used to own a garage in Vernon. We have our own garage on the property. The oil is changed, the brakes are changed, the rotors are changed. Everything is inspected all the time. We do transports for the railroad. The railroad periodically inspects our cars as well, randomly. So at any given time. Our vehicles are safe. Our cars are clean. I don't know what to say about all of that. But if what this all comes down to, and what Thomas Transportation is saying to me in this as well, is because we're interstate registered under our DOT numbers, it doesn't make any difference because we have to follow the federal regs. All right? Mm-hmm. So if we're following the federal regs, it shouldn't matter what town we're running through, and it shouldn't matter if the call is originating there or not originating there, because we're already superseding any town requirement anyway. And we have, our primary base is not in Brattleboro. However, we have a few customers within Brattleboro that we're very fond of, that are elderly, that are handicapped, that can't stand out in the sun and wait for a bus. It can't necessarily wait 48 hours for a current transportation or a Green Mountain to come through because their needs happen as they happen. We've catered to them. We don't only pick up, this was never about a taxi business for us to begin with. We pick up groceries for people, they give us lists. We pick up prescriptions, we pick up pets, bring them to vets. We do snow plowing for people. We do all kinds of things. And that is the reason that we registered as a transportation service rather than a taxi when we did our DBA. All right? And I'm sorry, I'm a little elevated at the moment. I'm usually more calm than this, but I'm very impassioned at the moment about it. And if it boils down to, because the federal has higher restrictions than you, and certain vehicle suppliers have those numbers, and we only run those through not to get harassed and not to have to follow these rules, we will do so. Second biggest concern between Thomas and VTS is this. If you allow one municipality within any given region to pass an ordinance this broad, if you will, it will empower, it sets a precedent, and it empowers every other town around to do the same thing. And there's no way, as Adventure pointed out, that we could afford to register, license, and comply with all those rules in every area that we pick up or drop people off in. It can't happen and still be able to cater to the general audience, which is typically lower income, elderly, handicapped, and people that for whatever reason are misfortunate enough not to be able to have their own driver's license, but still need to get to work, to court, to dentists, to hospitals. And that is our biggest concern. And that was my reason for coming here during your last meeting, to speak out and speak and have a voice for those people. And I've gotten many, many letters from those people since the last meeting, which I didn't think I needed to bring here. But in listening for the last hour and a half to the back and forth here, I'm uncertain what you really want. And, you know, I was kind enough to send my concerns, to send all of this out before this meeting, not to only you, every board member here, but also everybody that I thought was serving this area and filling this gap for your community. Or I probably would have been the only one here again this evening speaking to this. So, with that said, I'm really feeling like your definitions are too broad. Your paintbrush is too broad. Your idea as far as regulating and leveling the playing field, and yeah, when I read in national news that a Lyft driver was found to be a terrorist or a Uber driver, it scared the hell out of me. And yeah, I wouldn't want that for my community. And I understand that. But that's not what we're about. And this mom and pop company, like most of your town is made up of, is mom and pop companies. And if you are going to do this kind of thing, set this precedent, and then have all the surrounding communities do this, you're going to abolish these mom and pops. And in some ways, you're abolishing fair trade. And I want you to consider that respectfully.
Terry, thank you. We appreciate the time that you put in, and we appreciate your comments. And we also appreciate, or I speak for myself, I appreciate the service that you are providing to our residents here. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for your time and hearing me out.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thanks, Terry. Did you have any further comments? Well, it sounds like we were moving towards
Bill,
consensus.
you gotta put your hand up again.
Oh, sorry. Very sorry. Please come to the mic if you don't mind.
I'm Bill Knowles. I live at 30 Main Street, right across from the co-op down here. And there's two things. One, I talked to you about the water system, because I didn't know, since we've had a lot of trouble all over the country, I was interested to find out what is our focus going to be in the future to make sure we don't have a water problem that everybody else seemed to be having. And I'm talking about drinking water mainly. And we did some building for water safety, but I don't know what the safety is involved in. How safe are we in Brattleboro to have drinking water continuously?
And I haven't forgotten your suggestion, by the way. It's just a matter of timing it out and putting it on an agenda to
That's
provide.
fine, I can end there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, okay, thank you very much
Yes.
for notifying that.
No, of course.
The other thing is that this situation with changing the wall, and now it's the whetstone walkway. and I had to call the town garage twice.
Bill, I'm sorry.
What?
I just have to step in and say that we're not actually permitted to talk right now about those subjects. That's sort of something for public participation, which is...
This is a health issue.
Well, I understand, but right now we have to stick to our agenda. It's an
Fine, I just cut in. I was watching you guys on television and I couldn't hear, so I came in.
Oh, sure.
I drove in here to say something.
I'm not trying to admonish you or anything. It's just...
We can talk about it next time if you want, but we are going to talk about it.
And I will make sure, like I said, Bill, your comment, I never forgot it. It's just a matter of getting it on the agenda. And definitely that was not forgotten or invisible.
Okay.
So,
the
no,
water
I wanted,
system and
yes.
the cleanup system down here. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
That's all I need.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So as far as any other public comment on this ordinance amendment that we're discussing now? And so we're going to move towards a refinement.
Sure. So I'll summarize what I think you need from us next, and then you should close the public hearing for this evening, recognizing that when we're able to bring back the additional research to you, that there would be additional public hearing and potential adoption of an ordinance. You're going to want to see some revised language in the ordinance and an explanation of the results of our research regarding other levels of regulation of certain types of vehicles and drivers. And I think it stops there. To be any more specific than that is probably not going to bring back everything you're looking for. I recognize that what I've just described is broad, but we need to dig into the research to be able to better define, if we're going to go out broader than a taxi ordinance, which would require no action from you. You just not adopt this one and we stick with our current regulations. We're going to go broader than that, but not as broad as what has been brought to you so far. We're going to need to do some additional research to figure out where that sweet spot looks like it is to us based on everything that we've been hearing and the concerns that have been raised by board members. If what we bring to you is doesn't hit that mark, there's the opportunity to further refine it as we go forward, and the other members will be present when we do that.
And well, the other question too is when you say research, or is there any way to look at what other places nearby cities are doing around this? I'd be very curious to see how they're dealing with this as well, because I'm sure we're not the only ones looking at the influx of Uber or Lyft, for example. So I'd be very curious in your research if you were, let's say, I don't know, look at Greenfield or Northampton, or seeing if, whoever down the corridor might be dealing with similar issues. I'd be very curious to look at how they're tackling it as well.
We can certainly do that, and we can also look to other Vermont, New Hampshire municipalities
Absolutely.
as well. So, one comment is, it seems to me a lot of the people who spoke today have these DOT licenses and whatnot. But in trying to level the playing field, we're also trying to protect the person who may want to run a taxi or a vehicle for hire that does not want to work for Uber or for Lyft, does not want to be so big as to get into the DOT type of regulation, but that's also a private person that's contracting out his or her car for picking up a passenger for money, that we want to look at the regulations. So,
Exactly, yeah.
So it can go actually the smaller route compared to the bigger companies as well. But we'll look at that. I certainly need to look at the DOT regulations, and we'll come back.
I would ask that you understand that last time it was a couple of very specific questions that you needed answered before you could see if you were ready to proceed.
Yeah.
Tonight, what we've gotten into is really almost starting over to define that target that we're shooting for. And so I don't know that it would be 2 weeks from tonight that we'd be able to be back
That's
with the
okay.
results.
I actually would rather we don't rush, because it would do us a bigger disservice to rush. I don't care if it takes 4 weeks. I don't care if it takes 5 weeks. I want it to be right. So as long as it needs to take, we definitely need to take all of these concerns into consideration. So I don't, yeah.
Thank you. So that's, I think, the right way to proceed too, if that's acceptable to the two of you. There's an administrative impact to that I wanted to make known to you, I think I know how we should proceed, but I want to make sure that we don't get at cross purposes with the board. So this is the time of year when taxi companies are renewing their licenses with the town. And we've postponed that process because we've been in the middle of this process.
Yep.
So I believe that what we should do, since we have no clear expectation of exactly where we're going to land from this process, and we also don't know how long it might take to get to an endpoint, I think we should go ahead and have taxi companies that are operating in Brattleboro be subject to coming into compliance through the normal process under the existing taxi ordinance, and we'll proceed forthwith to do that, and then be back to address this when we're ready with the additional information that you need.
Okay. Yep, so that means, Terry, you're going to have to pay attention to our agendas to figure out when it is and let everybody else know.
My next question was, when will we get feedback or be informed of what's going on, so we have...
The same time we do. It'll appear on the agenda when the staff has the information they need to come back to us.
So just keep pulling up?
Yeah, it's usually the Friday before our select board meeting. So anytime there's a select board meeting coming up, it's the Friday before that you should be able to see stuff on the website and see our agenda.
And we meet the first and third Tuesdays.
And it won't be next time.
It will say on there that we're going to discuss the...
Yeah, just like it said, ordinance.
Exactly as it is tonight.
Yeah.
It'll be, second reading and potential adoption of this ordinance.
Can I just ask, clarify something? When you say taxi companies doing business in Brattleboro,
yes.
At the moment, we're the only taxi company licensed in Brattleboro. Are you going to enforce any taxi company doing business in Brattleboro?
You're going to have to wait for the answer to that.
Well, you're the only one who will be reapplying to maintain your compliance.
But don't you think that's a little bit unfair?
No, please let me finish. We will be communicating to others who are operating comparable service in Brattleboro about becoming compliant with the town's ordinance.
Sorry, guys.
Okay.
We want to use Brattleboro taxi too, so...
So folks, if you need to chat about this amongst yourselves, you're welcome to step
Thank
out.
you very much. Thank you.
Yep.
You're welcome.
Thank
we
you.
need to close our public hearing as our next order of business. So do I hear a motion?
Do it in stereo.
I make a motion to close the public hearing section and move on to new business.
Okay. All those in favor of closing the public hearing?
Aye.
Aye. And we are now moving on to new business. And our first order of business here is the Hinsdale Bridge project. We have our second piece of business to do around that subject.
We do. This one is the finance and maintenance agreement, which is VTrans language for when there's a state project going on in a municipality. There's always a finance and maintenance agreement. Sometimes they are as simple as the signage project, for instance, that's going on right now at Exit 2. There was a finance and maintenance agreement that was entered into between VTrans and the town at least a year ago, maybe longer, related to that, saying that they would come and install all new signage at their expense, and the town would be responsible for doing the routine maintenance on that signage. At some point when there's another capital improvement to that interchange, that would be a DOT or a VTrans responsibility. Sometimes there's actually the town taking responsibility for the full responsibility for a VTrans improvement. So that would be in certain circumstances where they might say do an improvement to a bridge that's on a state highway that comes through the town, but where it's town jurisdiction, the portion of the highway that is a town road, then we might actually have a DOT project where we take on a more complete responsibility in the finance and maintenance agreement. Here what we have is an interstate bridge, not interstate highway, but a bridge that's connecting the two states that is 17% of the bridge is going to be in Vermont. It's going to serve a very broad regional need. And through the work that we've done together with not only VTrans officials, but the state legislature, we've been able to define the expectations of the town's role to be routine maintenance, such as patching a pothole, that might appear in the state portion of this bridge. Maintaining the street lights, which we always knew would be a town responsibility in this bridge, and the traffic signals at the interchange with Route 142, Vernon Road, which is a town road, a town responsibility. So there's a limitation to those sort of reasonable, routine, expected responsibilities, and the long-term, larger scale maintenance obligation for the Vermont portion of this bridge will remain with VTrans. And based on having been able to achieve that resolution to who's going to be responsible for what, we're happy to recommend to you that you approve the town entering into this agreement.
Okay.
Great. So, do I hear a motion?
Yes, I move we authorize the town manager to execute the finance and maintenance agreement with Vermont VTrans as proposed.
Thank you. We have a motion to approve amendments to the Code of Ordinance.
No.
Whoops, I'm sorry. We have a motion to authorize the town manager to execute a finance and maintenance agreement with VTrans as proposed. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And opposed, 0, so that's 3-0. Jan? And our next order of business is going to be fiscal year 18 year-end financial report from John.
Actually,
Oh, no, from you, I'm sorry.
yeah, if you want to take a deeper dive into some of the details, either John or I will be happy to
We're relying
do
on
that
you,
with you. John will do the next one when we do our monthly,
Great.
but I'm happy to report that we ended the fiscal year, and I should put a asterisk on this to say these are, of course, the unaudited figures, so there might be very minor changes when we come back with an audit a few months from now, but we would expect that these will be either the same or very close to the same numbers, and we are 450, we were, when we ended the fiscal year, $450,000 to the good compared to the FY18 budget. We say it that way because we use fund balance each year we've been doing this for the last several years as an investment into capital expense, but it has been a relatively large amount. This past year, it was actually over $1 million, $1,099,975 of authorized use of fund balance in the budget. Because we ended up using only $649,653 of fund balance, we are to the good $453.22. It's technically not a surplus from an accounting point of view because the use of the $649,653 would be technically a deficit of $649,653, but we planned to use $1 million, and we were able to only use $650, and that's the difference there. What's important about that is the fact that we, in the current year's budget, you'll recall the budget that was approved by town meeting actually drew our unassigned fund balance down below 10% of the annual operating budget amount, which we strive to maintain. That's our guideline, and we almost always adhere to it. This year, because of the variety of capital needs, including the very large expense for the aerial ladder truck for the fire department, we ended up preparing, we adopted a budget that would authorize the town to actually draw down that fund balance to 9.6%, the unassigned fund balance. We won't actually be drawing it down to that degree because of being $450,000 to the good in this outcome of the FY18 budget. So we won't have the full 450 available for use again next year, but we can maintain our 10% guideline and still have about $300,000 that would be able to be applied to capital projects next year. So we'll be much more specific about that when we bring you a proposed budget in about 6 weeks. But that's the forward-looking implication of the outcome from this past year. A couple of quick highlights about how we ended up being in this position at the end of the fiscal year. Rooms and meals tax receipts came in $71,000 higher than expected. We actually anticipated some growth over the prior year, but there was very substantial growth over the prior year, and we had that additional $71,000 worth of revenue. Investment income, you'll recall that there was a mid-year change that John recommended and the select board approved to invest town funds in Still very secure, very liquid investments, but investments with the savings and loan that actually will yield more than where they had been invested previously. This investment income will be next year an increase by an even greater amount because this was a mid-year change, but that mid-year change yielded $30,000 worth of revenue beyond what we had expected from investments this year. Our health insurance program cost us $178,000 less than what was budgeted. And the staffing in the police department cost approximately $175,000 less than budgeted. That, of course, was a mixed blessing because of being the result of being understaffed in the police department for the entire year and being substantially understaffed for a good portion of the year. There was one significant over expenditure, which was the $105,000 additional transfer that had to be made to the solid waste fund. I'm going to talk about solid waste here in a little bit, and we intend, as we propose the general fund budget for the coming year and go through that process during November and December and January, to also be reviewing the funding of the solid waste budget, because we've had the last 2 years to make a substantial additional transfer from the general fund into the solid waste fund. So we're going to try to calibrate that better, and we'll be going over that in detail during the budget process. The one last thing I would say is just in terms of the overall magnitude of this $450,000 to the good, this is the smallest one we've had in the last 3 years. We had a year of around 900, we had a year in the 600 to 700 range, and some questions and concerns were raised about that at the time. Those are valid concerns. If you have a surplus that large without good solid reasons, something that was unusual that happened, those are reasonable concerns. What we explained for those years was there were actually substantial changes made in the employee benefits program and in certain other things. In 1 year, it was actually a change in the solid waste program that saved us money. The health insurance has been a place where we've continued to find ways to save money. So those were the reasons why, though. Implementing those mid-year changes were reasons why we saw larger surpluses in those other years. This 450 is solidly within the range of where we want to end. If we're between $300,000 and $500,000 to the good, that's a good place for us. Higher than 500 means we better have a good explanation of something unusual. But if we're down, closer to zero, it means that there's either been a really bad winter with a lot of winter maintenance expenses, or something else has happened that's caused us to be really close to actually falling into deficit. When we're budgeting, we're not ever trying to pad things, but we are always trying to be conservative so that we protect against actually being in a deficit at the end of the fiscal year. So our goal would always be to have a surplus, and we believe that in the 2 to 3% range is a responsible place to be. And based on the current size of the budget, that's in that approximately $300,000 to $500,000 range.
I don't know if you already said this, I'm going to repeat it anyway. The town health insurance, $178,000 that we saved was based because we restructured the way the health insurance policy is financed without reducing the quality at all.
Exactly.
And the town employees all agreed with that. That restructuring is now done. We won't see that. Mm-hmm. We'll see the lower number from now on, but it won't appear as a surplus because we didn't put in.
We actually will, but inconsistently, and the reason why is because of that new structure. So because we're essentially self-insured now for a portion of it, from year to year we may see savings in that HRA layer that would result, be reflected in a report like this. It's unlikely that it would be of this magnitude going forward.
Yeah, and the other one is we've had a we don't over budget. We budget for the number of police officers we're supposed to have. You just don't are having great difficulty filling out the force. Right. And so that we actually have three employees on the way.
The good news is with the officers that have recently returned to full duty, and with 2 who have just finished their field training and become fully capable now of being out in a cruiser on their own, patrolling the town, we're up to 25 again. So we're not to 27. Right. And it's an ongoing process because there will be some more attrition even as we have additional ones going to the academy, but we're making progress towards being fully staffed.
Yeah, great.
I do have a question. So besides getting lucky in certain areas? Are we taking, and you probably are already doing this, taking a look at what's working well so we can continue to duplicate that?
Absolutely. So we'll talk a lot through the budget process about exactly those things. There's going to be the majority of the town's budget, you'll see either no change or incremental change because of the things that are being addressed in a solid manner, both on the expenditure side and the revenue side, where we're pretty much right where we need to be, unless there's any change of level of service that would be directed by the select board and approved by town meeting. So we'll focus a lot of attention during the budget process on those places where we think there's room for improvement. But you'll see the vast majority of the line items will be not significantly changed.
Perfect. Thank you.
The only comment I was going to make on this, which struck me as good news all around, is that we're consistently seeing rooms and meals local option tax performing pretty well. And I feel that that's a pretty good bellwether of some great vibrancy in our downtown and visitors coming to town, and I think it's a great thing. So.
For the viewers at home, you might want to clarify what rooms and mills local option means.
That is basically a small tax that's applied to hotels and meals. And since on the meal side it's discretionary, and of course it's also discretionary. I'm sorry?
1%. 1% is the portion of it that is for the local option, and then there's a 9% state tax, so it's 10% on the meals.
And viewers at home should know that there's very few options that the town actually has under Dillon's rule, which was mentioned earlier, for us to raise funds that are not on the backs of taxpayers, and this is one really nice example. And so, but I did want to underline that as a really nice trend, and I want to touch wood and make sure it just continues. But it's nice to see our rooms and meals rising.
And hopefully we'll hear at some point in the not too distant future about the possibility of collecting that all ourselves and not paying the state a big chunk of it for collecting it and giving it back.
Right.
Still waiting on that one.
So, we did talk about that last year, as it would require a charter change.
Yes.
So it could be done by charter change, and then we would set up our own mechanism for collecting. It can't be done under the state statute.
Yeah, I understand. I thought there was something more about up to it than that, or more that you were looking into.
Maybe you and I can talk
about
further.
the numbers. Exact numbers and things like that.
Okay.
And start drafting the change.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Sure.
And do we want to now...
There's no motion required.
No motion.
No, off you go.
On this one or the next one.
Right. So we want to maybe pass it on over to John for the monthly financial report.
Can I say a couple things about the year end, just real quickly? I'll just give you an update on the utilities fund and the solid waste fund. And the utilities fund revenues were 142.4% of their budget, and the expenses were 99.5%. So expenses were really right where we expected them, and revenues were much higher. And that's because we got a loan subsidy on one of our clean water fund, revolving fund loans. And that loan subsidy was $2,368,442. So a substantial surprise subsidy that we received last year.
Can we get that next year too?
I don't think so.
Same water.
Same water. And solid waste revenues were at 110.4% and expenses were 102.6%. And really that the revenues were over because we had that additional transfer of $105,000. So that's just kind of a brief summary on those two funds that we normally report on. Parking was revenues were at 97.9 and expenditures 97.5. So basically right on target. So,
thank you, John. Sorry I didn't pass that over to you. I should have.
It's no problem.
I'm new at this.
No problem. Let's see. So we're 2 months into the fiscal year. And that's 16.7% of the way through the fiscal year. And right now, general fund expenditures were at 18.8% as of the end of August. And again, as we make our prorations for insurance, human resource payments, human resource service payments, and annual lease and loan payments, the percentage comes down to 15.4%. So once those prorations are made, we're basically in good shape compared to where we think we should be. And as of the end of August, utilities were at 17.5%, and parking was at 13.9% of their annual expense budgets. And again, when we prorate a large encumbrance of $105,000 in the utilities fund, that percentage comes down to 16.1%. So again, basically right on target where we would expect to be. And solid waste, 13.9% for the revenues, 10.4% for the expenses. And again, the August refuse bag revenue, curbside collection costs, and tipping fees are not going to be recorded until September, so you're only really looking at the activity for July. The loan fund shows that we had $4,427,180 in outstanding loans issued through the town's loan programs. 3 of them had payments that were overdue, and 2 loans are in default and fully reserved. Program income, we had $475,344 available for additional grants and loans as of the end of August. And then finally, the grant report contains information on 35 active grants and 5 grants that were currently in the application process. So again, a very active grant program here in the town in applying for outside grants. So if anybody has any questions on any of the line item details, I'll certainly try to answer them, but the bottom line is things seem to be looking good, on target, and no surprises so far.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody on the board have any questions? Okay. Oh, I have to ask a question. This is off the wall, very simple. Somewhere in there, I saw a revenue item of bicycle registration. Yeah. And can anyone give me a 20-second history of whether or not, do we still do bicycle registration?
We offer it, we don't require it. So there was a time when it actually was a pretty serious program. Yeah. We've talked about this every budget year because it's a very small line item in revenue. Well, no, actually, we haven't. I don't believe we've talked about it here. What I mean is, in the staff's preparation of the budget, each year we say, is it really worth continuing to show that? And what I get reminded each year is there are actually certain individuals in town, and particularly kids, like to register their bike and get the sticker and put it on their bike. And so we keep offering the opportunity for people to do that. At one time, it was viewed as an important thing to do in order to be able to actually track stolen bikes and for other purposes like that. It's just
insurance claims. And
stuff, but so few of them get sold anymore. It's really not useful for that purpose. It's something we continue to do more as a way for those who like the tradition of it to be able to continue to have that tradition.
Well, it sounds like it's something that if kids get excited about it, it's worth holding on to.
That's why we've never come to suggest to you that it go away.
Well, I mean, we are trying to encourage more bicycle-friendly pathways and bicycle use and bicycle parking, so maybe we can tie that in someday. Registration. Inexpensive registration. Okay, so moving on. We are going to be discussing Retreat Farm.
Yes.
So, and Peter,
thank you.
I'll leave that to you.
This is a proposed settlement of litigation. The board members are very well familiar with the details of this. It's been evolving over the last several weeks. It's been the subject of executive session discussions. We have now ready for board approval and public disclosure the stipulation that would settle this. Very briefly, I'd like to just summarize that it has to do with the property value and the degree to which some of the property at the Retreat Farm is tax exempt. In the hearings at the listers level and then at the Board of Civil Authority level earlier this year, there were 2 separate outcomes. And those 2 outcomes, the result, the implication of the 2 separate outcomes was a difference of about $10,000 worth of annual revenue to the town. The town appealed the decision of the Board of Civil Authority because we felt that they had gone too far and allowed too much of the land at Retreat Farm to be declared to be exempt. Because the parties were so close together in terms of the financial impact of this, both parties realized that this was not a matter that was going to be worth really litigating and spending a lot of time and money contesting in court to get a decision by the court to resolve. So we engaged in really constructive and fruitful negotiations to try to resolve this by looking for a middle ground number. And in fact, we've landed on just such a resolution. So what's before you sets out very specifically certain parcels that are to be taxed and certain parcels that are not to be taxed. And then in addition to that, a $6,000 annual voluntary payment that will be made by Retreat Farm to the town, what we often call a pilot, but under the nuances of Vermont law, the state reserves to itself the use of payments in lieu of taxes by that term of art. So when we make these arrangements locally, we refer to them as voluntary payments or voluntary fees. We're going to receive such a voluntary payment of $6,000 per year from Retreat Farm as part of this settlement. And that'll put the parties in a situation where between the taxes paid by Retreat Farm and the voluntary payment made, we'll be right about in that middle point between the BCA decision and the Lister's decision. This, if you approve it this evening, will stay in effect for 5 years with the expectation that as Retreat Farm continues to restore buildings on the property and continues to add uses to the property, that it would be appropriate 5 years from now for the town to take a fresh look at this and have a new review with the Retreat Farm owners as to the degree to which what's actually happening at the farm at that time entitles them to more or less tax exemption than what's reflected in this agreement. We recommend your approval.
Great. Yeah, it was a nice outcome. Thanks for all the hard work on that. And
Bob Fisher is still here if you have any questions about the legal side of this, and he actually did heavy lifting on getting us to this stipulation.
I don't really have anything to add. That was a great summary of the agreement.
We should let Bob go home.
right. Exciting stuff happening at Retreat Farm. So thanks for your efforts on that. Could I entertain a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to authorize the town manager to execute the stipulation with Retreat Farm Ltd. as presented.
Thank you. We have a motion to authorize the town manager to execute the stipulation with Retreat Farm Limited as presented. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And no opposed, so that's 3-0 on that motion. Next up, we have a municipal planning grant for downtown design plan. For a downtown design plan.
Hello.
Thanks for being here, Sue.
No problem.
You're going to tell us all about this?
The Planning Department and the Planning Commission are looking to apply to the Vermont Municipal Planning Grant Program to undertake a downtown design plan. So it's pretty much a master plan. It's a type of plan that is looking at kind of urban design principles of public spaces, connections, so biking and walking. A downtown master plan has been a priority for the department and the Planning Commission. It first appeared in the 2013 town plan. So this is a good opportunity to pursue it through the Municipal Planning Grant Program. And that requires a resolution that gets signed by the board, and I think you also have the gist in front of you as well.
I had a question. If I can ask questions.
Certainly.
I saw a possibility for a design charrette.
Yes.
And I'm just curious, I'm sure you guys already have this in mind, who will be involved in the designing and how will we ensure diversity and community involvement? Because that's my concern.
Yep. And that's a concern of the department and the Planning Commission as well.
Mm-hmm.
We do plan to hire a consultant or a consultant team, but the Planning Commission will also be doing outreach. We haven't put together a plan yet. We'd work with the consultant to do that. But we definitely want to communicate with all users of the downtown.
And including going into neighborhoods if you're going to be doing outreach, making sure it's just not the usual suspects,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
Perfect.
We found we need to get out. We can't expect people to come to meetings.
Right.
So does livability include housing? Will you be looking at options for where housing might be created?
I think that's a possibility, but that really hasn't been fleshed out yet. We feel like our zoning is permissive of housing, and there's not too many infill possibilities in the downtown left.
Actually, I was thinking about the site where the archery building is, being waterfront property and the park up there. And I'll let the cat out of the bag. I also think we should take the back half of Harris Place and make riverfront housing there as well. Hey, not Harris Place, the Harris parking lot, which is greatly underutilized.
Yeah.
And it's some housing back there, but
I think there's the potential of looking at that specifically because that's a town property. The archery building probably has some other
it has issues.
Challenges that would have to be overcome first before you could have residential down there, because it is a brownfield site. Right now there's some restrictions on use, but
it just sits there.
I think it's all
year after year after year. It's just troublesome.
I think those are all fair game for a downtown master plan, for sure.
Great, thanks. Prepared to move.
Sounds like some good stuff going on. Yes, I'm not supposed to move motions, so would someone else like to do that?
I move we adopt the FY19 resolution for a municipal planning grant and to authorize the submission of a grant application in the amount of $22,000 to the Vermont Municipal Planning Grant Program.
Thank you. We have a motion to adopt the fiscal year 19 resolution for a municipal planning grant and to authorize the submission of a grant application in the amount of $22,000 to the Vermont Municipal Planning Grant Program. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, 0, and that's 3-0. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I have a feeling you should stay there.
Aye.
Because the next up is 250 Birge Street property.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So that's the property that's down on the Whetstone Brook that you may be familiar with. The town has been working with Vermont River Conservancy and several other state partners to do a floodplain restoration project on that site. There is some soils that potentially need to be cleaned up on the site, but in the meantime, the state is trying to get all their ducks in a row, and part of this project has always been that there will be a river corridor easement of some sort on the property, and any easement that they are a part of actually has to, I guess, pass the governor's office. So they want to get that ball moving, and they are looking for a letter of support from the select board for their involvement in getting a river corridor easement. Since I wrote this memo, I've since found out that it might not be a straight up river corridor easement. It might be a broader easement with river corridor easement as part of it, only because there's several funders on the site that have interests. So it might just be a little piece in a bigger easement that may not actually be from the state. It might be VHCB might write the easement and allow the state to enforce kind of the channel management and riparian buffer piece of it. So they still want to move the project forward and get it before the governor's desk, because even I think if it's part of that, they need the governor's signature for the state to acquire an easement or be a third-party beneficiary to an easement. So I don't know if that maybe changes the letter a little bit for you, but they're hoping that they can still move it forward.
Does this mean that we possibly would need to edit that letter before it's signed?
We could edit it.
Okay, yeah, just to make sure that it properly explains what you just provided to us, and then so that whatever we'd be signing, it's accurate.
it was, and this is news to Peter as well, so I apologize.
Of course,
it was Vermont River Conservancy, the partner who will also be an easement holder, that was like, whoa, this is actually pretty complex, and it's the person at the state that contacted me, it might not be as simple as she thinks it may be, because FEMA might have some interest, EPA might have some interest, so it might be structured a little bit differently.
I think the motion is general, broad enough that we can okay it. Yeah.
Okay. And, okay, so I guess, I mean, does that mean we will make the motion with the stipulation that the letter will be properly edited? Okay.
Before you do,
Yep.
can I just ask a question first?
Sure.
I think probably some people will be wondering, this overall, this is a floodplain resiliency
Yes, it
action
is.
that we're trying to perform.
Good point.
And I just want people to understand that. So, but for my own edification, what is riparian buffer exactly? Because it is mentioned as a 50-foot.
Yeah, so
I'm not sure what that means.
So it's usually measured from the top of the bank, of the stream bank, and it's basically, they want it to remain vegetated. You can often have a path through it to get down to the brook, but it helps stabilize the bank for it to be kept in a vegetative state. So right now there's Japanese knotweed that would be removed and planted with something that would kind of help stabilize the bank. But it doesn't mean that there couldn't be a walking path or that.
Right. I know a lot of people in our community were interested in some sort of recreational purpose. Limited.
Yes.
Limited.
Great.
Okay, thank you.
So I'd like to make a motion with the stipulation that the letter would be properly edited to reflect the realities of what's going to be happening, to authorize Vice Chair Brandy Starr to sign a letter to the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation on behalf of the Brattleboro Select Board in support of the proposed river corridor easement.
May I make a clarifying remark before you vote?
Sure.
Certainly.
So it was written this way, and the letter for this evening was drafted for Brandy's signature with the expectation that it was actually going to get signed tonight, and Brandy was going to be here and Kate wasn't.
Right.
So if the board would just also note that it may be that by the time we've got it, the letter properly edited, it may be Kate signing it instead of Brandy. It'll still be the same action on behalf of the board.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Should we mention that in the motion? No.
I think it can.
I think with the stipulation that it's properly edited would cover that too.
Excellent.
Put the right name on there would be proper. I was going to put your name on.
Thank you.
Yeah, why not?
You're here too.
All right, so are we ready to vote on the motion?
I will just let you all know that we do have a motion to authorize Vice Chair Brandy Starr to sign a letter to the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation, properly worded, on behalf of the Brattleboro Select Board in support of the proposed river corridor easement. And all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And that passes 3-0. Now, up on our agenda, we have a discussion about subordinating an existing small business program loan.
Indeed. So Hermit Thrush Brewery was approved for a $70,000 loan. They have been making their regular payments on that. Their current balance at this time is $54,797.75. Recently, they had a unfortunate situation where some defective cans were provided to them, and they filled them with beer and shipped the beer out, and then realized that the cans were defective and had to do a recall. It didn't result in any harm to any customers or any complaints from any customers. They got on it fast enough to actually bring it back before any of that happened. But there's been a substantial cost to the company for this. And so they approached the Small Business Assistance Program Loan Committee, of whom Dave is a member, to request two things. One was that for a 4-month period of time, they'd be allowed to make interest-only payments. The committee has approved that. And that they also wanted to have the town allow the loan to be subordinated from a current 4th position in the debt structure for the Hermit Thrush to 5th position. And the basis for that is Brattleboro Savings and Loan is providing a line of credit to Hermit Thrush to see them through this cash flow situation that's resulted from having the defective cans and the loss of income. And so the committee voted unanimously to recommend that the select board approve this subordination. Staff joins in that recommendation. This is the second loan that Hermit Thrush has had for the town, and they have been a really good payer, and they're a successful growing business in town. We think that it's important that we do this to help see them through this one unfortunate time.
They paid their first loan off before it was due. They used it to expand. And then when we raised the amount that was available, they came to do another expansion and have been paying on that loan as well. And basically what we're doing is just taking a few months off from getting the payment so that they can recover this. It was just tens of thousands of cans of beer. I mean, just astonishing amount of beer. And they just bang, 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 went right through all the processes of getting it right, getting it back, so that there wasn't any loss of customer or loss to the brand. And they've been doing a great job. And so there's just no reason not to continue to support them. And that's really what these loans are for anyway.
Indeed. And luckily, the whole sour beer thing is not declining too much. It's still very popular.
Yeah.
So I would like to move to make a motion to authorize the town manager to execute a loan subordination agreement in connection with the Small Business Assistance Program loan for Hermit Thrush Brewery.
Thanks, Shanta. We have a motion to authorize the town manager to execute a loan subordination agreement in connection with the Small Business Assistance Loan Program for Hermit Thrush Brewery. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. And that passes 3-0. Next on our agenda is something that Shanta brought to us. It's a request for future consideration of bulky item pickups and other solid waste matters.
So I'd like to wait till we have a full board to have a discussion about this and possibly invite public comment
I
on
was
it.
gonna suggest that as well.
Yeah, so
And
I would like
publicize
to.
it too.
I did all my homework, though.
But if you take the pages out and put them in here.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah, she'll keep it. So, I would love to see if there's a possibility. I know we have a full agenda coming up in October.
Right.
But I would
We do
love.
October 16th.
I could do October 16th for sure, and what I will do is publicly make an announcement on my social media that if people haven't responded to me, thank you everybody, by the way, for all the responses. I've got a lot of responses, helpful stuff that people poured in, and so I'll let them know that we'll be hearing this on October 16th, and it just gives time for me to properly let people know all about that, what we'll be discussing, so thank you.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you. Finally, we do have some committee appointments and organizational matters to discuss.
May I do the first one?
Oh, yes, please.
Thanks. So we were just talking about the Small Business Assistance Program Loan Review Committee. There are 2 positions on that committee that are to be filled by town staff members. One is filled, continuing to be filled by Finance Director John O'Connor. The other had been filled for the last several years by Planning Director Rod Francis before he left for another position in July of this year. So we believe that it would be appropriate to have Patrick Moreland, the Assistant Town Manager, appointed to that position. I want to make clear, we had Sue here just a few minutes ago. She's doing a great job. There's just in the rebalancing of some things as far as who does what. It was a joint decision among Sue and Patrick and me, and looking at the relationship between the work done by this committee and the economic development work that Patrick's very involved with on an ongoing basis, that it made sense to us that this particular assignment would fall to Patrick, so long as that's acceptable to the board.
Is it acceptable to Patrick?
Of course.
We haven't heard you speak at all tonight. So.
You're doing a great job.
Thanks. So I'll entertain a motion if anyone has one.
I move that we appoint Assistant Town Manager Patrick Moreland to the vacant administrative staff seat on the Small Business Assistance Program Loan Committee.
All right. David has moved to appoint Assistant Town Manager Patrick Moreland to the vacant administrative staff seat on the Small Business Assistance Loan Program Loan Committee. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And that passes 3-0. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And our second item is to fill some committee vacancies, right?
Correct.
So, we're supposed to list these out, right?
Yes, oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, you were gonna.
I was just going to say, there is one that requires a choice. The Citizens Police Communications Committee, there are 2 applicants for 1 position. Each of the other 4 applicants that are before you this evening are eligible to be appointed without an actual nomination process by the board. You just need to identify them and the board to which they would be appointed and then take the action.
Okay. So we're looking at Dara and, I can't pronounce the last name.
Dara Kanamui.
Kanamui and Gary Stroud.
Correct, and that's the one for which you need to make a choice between the 2.
Okay.
It was, they were not both able to make it tonight to present themselves to the board for interview, and if you want, both because there's not a full board present and because they weren't able to come and be interviewed, then you could postpone this one until October 2nd, or if you feel prepared to move forward, then please do.
I always like to hear from people, but that's just me. Like it makes
me too.
It makes the application come alive. Like I could read it on paper, but I just really want to see the people in front of me to be able to tell me how they're going to serve and why they want to serve.
I agree, and I don't think it'll affect the committee
Right.
because they're, from what I understand, they have enough to function in the meantime.
Yes, they
Right.
Great.
Okay.
Good idea.
Cool.
So remind me of Kate's colloquial way that she always says this. We just
One of us reads it
we just
going down
read
the
it straight
list.
down.
When it's just a list, you can read all 4 of them and do 1 motion to approve.
Okay. I'll do it.
Right?
Yes, you're nominating these people and then approving the nomination.
Okay.
Do I hear nomination?
Yes, I nominate Aaron Rodgers for not for a 2-year term, because there are 2 vacancies. I nominate Aaron Rodgers for the Conservation Commission, Nora Dissinger for the Development Review Board, Becky Day for the Recreation and Parks Board, and Deb Bunker for the Traffic Safety Committee.
May I make 2 clarifying notes on those? Just that Nora Dissinger would be an alternate if you approve this on the Development Review Board, and Deb Bunker would be the Chamber of Commerce representative onto the Traffic Safety Committee.
So they recommended.
So the Chamber has actually recommended Deb for this position.
We're just approving that recommendation.
Yep.
Okay. So we could just go ahead and say all those in favor of the current slate of candidates?
Sure.
Say aye.
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 Great. That slate of committee appointments has passed 3-0. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I would like to make a motion to adjourn.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Are you opposed?
No, I'm not. I'm not opposed. Aye. Aye.
Sorry.
Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Aye.
And we're adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just need that paperwork back if you signed it.
Sure.
Perfect.
Thanks, BCTV, Reformer, Commons.
Thank you, everybody.
All those in favor?